of you ever go to summer camp? We've asked this before, church camp, or maybe just backpacking with a group, or I think Chuck had a group that they would go camp periodically, church camp, family camp. But when I was a kid, I'm kind of using my experience at Camp Maranatha in Idaho. It's about an hour outside of the bustling metropolis of Cascade, which is halfway between Eagle and McCall. So it's the greater Cascade, McCall metropolitan area is where it was.
You can see that from here?
Yeah, exactly. So we would go, and I think I've told you this before, you'd get, we'd drive up there. It would take about 3 hours from Boise, and we would go on an old school bus, a rented school bus, and then a semi, they'd get a semi for all the luggage behind us, and we would go up this windy, the 55, the windy road up into the mountains, stop at McCall at a little mini mart and get your soda or whatever for lunch and eat lunch there, and then on a dirt road from McCall the last hour, or from Cascade the last hour, up to Camp Maranatha. About 15 minutes from Camp Maranatha was the Warm Lake Lodge, and Warm Lake is where we'd go swimming, and that was where the radio phone was. So didn't have a phone at the camp, didn't have phone wires even up to the lodge, but they did have a radio phone, and I think I told you before, it really was like a World War II. You know, you'd hold up this big thing and you felt like you were calling in airstrikes. So, an amazing place. But the thing I remember most was, I shouldn't say that, I remember a lot of things, but the relationships that I built at camp, the friendships were what made it amazing, those relationships. And we don't talk about that. Camp community. The first point, camp friendships are focused and intense. You make these friends, it would start out, you'd make camp friends that have deep connections and friendships with people that you didn't know. That was always the amazing thing. There was 8 churches, these little Baptist churches in the Treasure Valley, and Boise and Meridian and Cuna and McCall and Roswell. Just weird, these little tiny Nampa, Caldwell, these little towns that had little Baptist churches, and they worked together to run this camp in the summertime. So we'd meet usually at Meridian First Baptist, and we'd be on the lawn of the church, and a school bus would pull up. We'd throw our luggage in a big pile, and a couple of the dads or volunteers would carefully bring them into the semi. It was like one of those old Samsonite commercials, just heaving your stuff in there. Which, when I was little, and when eventually I became the camp director, that was the first place I was a camp director at Maranatha. So I worked my way from camper to counselor to director. And I realized, especially at the junior camps, which is up through 3rd grade, they didn't really open them up. Once the luggage got there, they stayed pretty much intact as to the way Mom packed it. Yeah, so they're wearing the same thing. But the thing is, we were all strangers held together by a common, smelly school bus when we get on there. And your first friends that you would make were people in about a 3-foot radius of you. The people, you in your seat, and the people in the seat in front and behind you. And that's it. That's how you they're near you, so now they're your best friends. And you go on a 3-hour drive in a smelly school bus, up windy roads, you kind of get to know each other. And you become fast friends when you get there. And then you get there and you arrive, and they divide you randomly into cabins, and you have a counselor and an assistant counselor and 8 other equally smelly people that you're spending the week with. And they become fast friends because you're spending this intense time 24/6, because you're only there 6 days, because we're Baptists, you were going to be in church on Sunday. So you would go through games like Lord of the Flies level games that you would play. You would do pranks. You would eat turkey tetrachloride for lunch. No, that's not true. The cooks were amazing. Actually, there are all these old farm women who would come up and cook these amazing meals that we didn't at the time realize how lucky we were. You'd cry, you would learn, there was spiritual awakening, there was emotional expression, and all of that caused this intense connection that you were together all the time with these people. And it made me think of the analogous, and I've thought this a long time, Jesus did a smart thing. He took 12 guys and went camping with them for 3 years. And I was thinking about those relationships. So we'll start there. We're talking about the disciples and how they connected, not only with God, but with Jesus, but with each other. John 13:34 and 35. And I love this. So now I'm giving you a new commandment. Jesus speaking specifically to the disciples. Love each other. Just as I have loved you, you should love each other. For your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. This was right after he washed their feet, right? He did this tangible, caring, kind of humble, gross job. And he said, this is, and he even says it, he goes, I'm doing this for you, and this is an example of how you're to treat each other and treat others. It's the ultimate example of humility, and Jesus is showing them what it means to be friends, to be in a community. He's like, we've been through all of this stuff together, and now this is how you should relate to each other. You've been through intense time, and now you're to love each other. This is how people will know, is because you guys like each other. And that shows up in caring for each other, in front of each other in tangible and caring and loving ways. He reinforces this, John 15, 12 to 17. This is my commandment, love each other in the same way I've loved you. There's no greater love than to lay down one's life for your friends. And I love this. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you slaves because a master doesn't confide in his slaves. Now you are my friends. Since I have told you everything the Father told me, you didn't choose me and I chose you. I appointed you to go and produce lasting fruit so that the Father will give you whatever you ask using my name. I love this. We're to love each other as Jesus loved us. And how did he describe that? He said, hey, be friends. You're my friends. Sometimes we think, I'm supposed to love everyone the way Jesus loved everyone, and I've got to admit, I can't do that. There are some people who are just hard to love, and I'm not perfect. I'm hard to love. So I always say this, maybe we should start with just liking somebody. If you feel like you can't love them, try to at least like everybody. Just be friends. Be friendly. Allow yourself that break and let God work in their life and in your life to produce love. They had this common experience of commitment to Jesus. It was intense. There was a diverse, like camp. The disciples were this diverse group, right? They all came from different, we had everything from zealots to religious people to fishermen, blue-collar guys to tax gatherers, just an interesting, weird group of people that Jesus brought together, and he's like, now you guys need to be friends. And we're going to do that by, I'm going to teach you, I'm going to bind you to my teachings and following my example, and we're just going to be together 24/7. It's intensity, just like camp friends. So they obeyed his teachings. He says, look, you're my friends because you're obeying my teachings, how he explained and understood the prophets and the writings. And he showed them an example, not coerce them, but out of love. And then he said, now you're to love each other. And I like this just little example in the next passage, Mark 6. We've talked about this just recently. Jesus went from village to village teaching people, and he called his 12 disciples together and began sending them out 2 by 2, giving them authority to cast out evil spirits. And he told them, take nothing for the journey except a walking stick, no food, no traveler's bag, no money. And he allowed them to wear sandals, but not to take a change of clothes. So the disciples went out, telling everyone they met to repent of their sins and turn to God. I love this. They've had these intense moments. They're just now starting to follow Jesus around and watch how he does it. And he sends them 2 by 2 to go out and do the work on mission. I wish I could see how he paired them up. Don't you wish we knew there was a list of like, John went with Bartholomew, or you know what I mean? And if I know Jesus, and I don't, I mean, I know Jesus, but I don't know how but I kind of know how he works sometimes. I feel like he might have put tough couples together. Let's put the zealot and the tax gatherer together. You guys go out and do the mission. Or brothers, how about that? You guys go, neither of you is in charge, and you got to go out. And it is a lot like camp, that they couldn't take suitcases. They had to carry a stick. I will tell you that's one thing that happens at camp. Half the kids find a great stick and carry it around all week. And he said, look, go out, do the mission. And they came back with these amazing stories of what they had done, what God had done through them. He's like, this is how we're going to learn this. You guys are going to bond, not only bond by being together, not only bond by believing what I teach you, but you're also going to bond by going out and doing the mission together starting right now. You're going to practice. So when I think of camp community, think of friendship, and the example of the disciples, I think we become close to each other when we're together a lot. We learn from each other when we're in diverse groups. We learn from different backgrounds and different understanding that we can still love and be unified and serve together, even if we have different understanding and different backgrounds. And I think we need to learn from this also that we need to just make an effort intentionally to be around each other. It is very easy to have this be the only time. Now, I will say again, I'm a little bit preaching to the choir because I know already in this group there are several pockets of you that gather periodically, and I love that, and I think we need to do that. And my challenge then is to add other people into that. Invite other people into your gatherings. Invite other people into when you get coffee. Invite other people into your Bible studies. Invite other people into your groups. When I was in high school, I ended up, my best friend and I, we went to camp. We decided to invite kids to youth group and then to camp. And I remember I had invited him and he started coming to church. And I remember when I brought that up, I said, we should invite Brian. And my friend said, he'll never come. And I was like, yeah, that's what I thought about you. So we invited Brian, and Brian came. And then we said, you know what, we should invite Jason. And Brian's like, Jason will never come. And Chris said, that's what we thought about you. And it worked away. We had this gang evangelism that we started inviting more and more guys, and we ended up at camp and had a great time together and came back and began to live that life and began to grow and encourage. And it was because we spent a lot of time together at school, playing on sports teams, hanging out afterwards. There was just a bond that happens, and we need to be able to do that. We need to create new friendships, regardless of the background, regardless of what other people, how different they are. Understand that we can bond together through Christ. You build relationships because of crisis, common crisis. Camp provides in crisis. Sometimes, like I said, it's games. I was thinking of several times that as a camp director, I'm trying to decide how much time I want to spend on this. Any of you ever played Buck Buck? Okay, this is a violent game. You would have one guy hold on to a telephone pole or a tree, and then the rest of that cabin, and kind of bend over, and the rest of them would put their hands around the waist of the guy in front of them until it's kind of like a bridge. And the other cabin would send guys one at a time running up, and you'd leap as far onto the bridge of guys on their back as you could, trying to make them fall down. I think that's probably banned in most countries now. A lot of injuries. Shockingly, people got hurt playing that. Steal the Bacon. You've played Steal the Bacon, right? I decided as a camp director once, I'm going to throw a twist into Steal the Bacon. So we lined everybody up, counted 1 through 12 or whatever it was, on 4 corners. And so had items in the middle, and you'd call out a number, and they'd run in there and try and grab it and bring it back across your line. I decided I'm going to mix this up, and I threw a football up in the air and called out a number, and they had to come run in. This is the only time I ever had to have a medevac fly in. Girl snapped her femur because they're all running in looking straight up as fast as they can. I changed that rules on that game too. No throwing it in the air. I did one. Do you remember those earth balls? Yeah. Big giant earth balls. I did the same thing, Steal the Bacon, and I said, okay, we can put that in, and the goal is now to push it across the other side. So again, called the number. They all ran in. The ball was about this big at first, and then when they all hit it, it was about this big. And then it pushed them back down, and all 4 guys flung back and land on the ground and whap their heads on the ground. No concussions that time, so that was actually that was a successful day. But at those moments of crisis, you're competing, there's energy, there's fear of losing. We did, games in the dark. Not just that though, then there's real life. Kids would legit, even high schoolers would get legit homesick. They miss their family, they miss their home, they miss their routine, and they'd have to be together. They would gain a new view of themselves and of each other from facing crisis, seeing what they could handle and what they couldn't, and needing to encourage and help and work together. There's common learning. There were speakers, always preachers at camps, sometimes great ones, sometimes not so great. But there was a lesson. People would be learning, and because they're where they're at, and they know that's the purpose, they most of the time are kind of open to learning new things about God. Mainly learning that they were loved by God, that we all have issues, and we can accept His care and His grace. And that's the gospel. And they would learn the gospel. They would learn skills, just practically swimming, making lanyards like a few weeks ago, skate park. There's common learning. Not only are they learning spiritual things, they're learning about the world around them, and they're gaining knowledge, and that bonds you together. When you're learning something together, it connects, it makes it easier. And there was common joy. They shared laughing and an amazing experience and the camaraderie that makes it even more fun when you're doing something with your friends. Good friends, but they're not... camp friends, camp community, the disciples are intense because they're there for together, and they're slowly the distractions are sloughed off. When we're at home, those same guys that we're friends with, we did a lot of stuff together, but we're distracted by things like school and other friends, and back then television, or girlfriends, or family commitments. There's things that distract. But when you're there, there's one purpose: being together and growing. So what do we do about that? How do we build this kind of community today? We need to look for opportunity to really get to know strangers. I think that's the one thing in this group. We know each other, we love each other, even when we add all the rest of the people who aren't here right now, it is a great community. But I think we need to continue to find ways, even at our age, to reach out and love strangers, invite strangers into our community. And I'm not talking about just inviting them to church or whatever. I'm saying into your community. And pretend like life is that bus going up to camp, and for whatever reason, that person is sitting next to you. And intentionally, we need to look for ways to not just recruit. We're not recruiting for some multi-level marketing. We're building relationships with people so they can be loved by Christ and experience his grace. And frankly, along the way, we get to experience friendship and build that community. Second thing is, quantity time often is quality time. I got to admit, one of the things, I love getting coffee with people. And I kind of have a list of folks kind of in the back of my mind that I kind of every couple of weeks try and make sure I touch base with. And then there are others that are less frequently, but I love to hang out with. And I realize, yeah, that's important. We sit down and talk about important stuff. But the relationships that are intense, that are this level of growth, are the ones that are just constant. That we're just around each other often. And maybe not even doing anything, not talking about anything deep, just hanging out. Brent and I had coffee the other day. We spent far too much time talking about Lord of the Rings, right? Which is delightful to me.
There's never too much.
That's right. There's no such thing, right? So make new friends, spend quantity time together, and then I think part of it is testimony. Tell the stories of your life. And again, not to recruit for the church, or not even really. We should be living the gospel, that everything we say is leading to the gospel, but be willing to be vulnerable. Tell stories of your life, both now and in the past. And then camp would be over, and we'd bring out our luggage, depending on your age. Little kids, completely intact. Teenagers, they brought a shocking amount of clothes to change 2 or 3, because it's smelly and dusty and dirty, and so every day 3 different outfits. So they'd bring their luggage out, put it on the semi, get on the bus, and you start heading home. And it was this very visible thing, very tactile, tangible thing. You drive down that windy road, and you're in the mountains and laughing and singing camp songs and then the more you get into town, you get through Cascade, and you go along the river, and you start coming into the outskirts of Boise, and now you're back in town. Camp friendships, number 2, have an ongoing impact, though. Even though knew we'd have to get out of that bus and the lawn at Meridian First Baptist, and our parents would be there, and it would be weird almost, because now worlds are colliding. We just, 24 hours ago, we're playing buck, and now we're on a church lawn, and our folks are there with the Ford LTD, and we're picking up our luggage, and we're saying goodbye, and we'd exchange addresses and phone numbers back then. Didn't have cell phones, didn't have email, didn't have FaceTime. We would exchange ways to get in touch with each other. I remember one year in particular, I didn't even talk about the relationship between the staff, the counselors, and the kids. There was somebody you knew who protected you, loved you, and was there for you. Speakers could be great or not great, but you could have an amazing week because of your relationship with your counselor. And I remember one year we had a great time, counselor. My friend Jeff called me that night. The friend I had made at camp. Get this phone call. He says, first thing out of his mouth, do you miss him? And yeah, we missed each other. He's like, I already miss everybody. And we would stay connected. You'd get a letter, a postcard. That summer, you'd get a postcard from some kid you met at camp who's now on vacation in Wyoming or something, and you get a postcard, or you'd get a phone call. And then usually that would, during school year, let down, and then once school started wrapping up, we'd get phone calls, are you going to camp? Are you going to be there? Who are you going to go? And we'd reconnect. There were a lot of those folks that I worked with, that we were campers together, and then we decided to be counselors together. And then when I was the camp director, I hired them as my staff. Guys and gals who had worked there forever. And every now and then I still on Facebook or get a text from one of them who we'd laugh about dumb things we did and remember that intense time. So it was weird. You had some post-camp blues, kind of depressed. But some of us would stay in touch. And not only did the relationships stay in touch, but because of that, what we learned and how we changed was encouraged by remembering, oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to be. And here's a person who knew that. Here's a person who went through that. I want to keep going. And it also helped me want that level of relationship again. I find myself through the rest of my life wishing I had that level of relationship again. College is a good example of that. You're around those same people 24/7. You're always, I think we long for that we long for that community. A couple of verses. John 17, 20 and 21. Jesus is praying, I like this. He goes, I am praying not only for those disciples, but for all who will ever believe in me through their message. I pray that they will all be one, just as you and I are one. As you are in me, Father, and I am in you. And may they be in us, so that the world will believe you sent me. Jesus wanted those 12 that hung out with him and went camping with him in their intense relationship to not only continue for them, but to spread all the way to us. He wanted that intensity and that friendship to be ongoing, not just when he was there to kind of foster it, not when they were camping in the wilderness, but even as they went out, and he knew they were going to go out to do their mission around the world, right? He gave them that commission, the great one, to go and share the gospel and make disciples here and around Samaria and to the whole world. But he's like, I want them to love each other. They're a diverse group that is close regardless of the things that normally separate us. Things like politics. You know, there are people in this room. There are Republicans and Democrats in this room. And we love each other. There are people who are wealthy and people who are struggling. There are people who are confident and people who are introverts. There are people of different nationalities and races and backgrounds and education level. All of our baggage that normally could separate us. Because we are friends of Jesus and because we're committed to each other, we can be unified. And that's what Jesus wants us to be. He wants us to still be friends even after he's gone. Also, all those who will forever believe in me, he wants us to be unified. John 13, that passage we're talking about. And since I, the Lord, your teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I've given you this example to follow. Do as I've done to you. That Last Supper, their communion, the thing we're going to celebrate here in just a little bit. He started it off by, remember, washing feet, and then he said, you guys, you need to do that to each other. That needs to be your normal mode. And that's how the rest of the world is going to know you're different. That the hierarchy is based on service, based on love, and based on humility. Our ongoing impact in our community and our friendship will be because we care for each other. And then Acts 2, 43 through 47. It worked. Jesus prayed for this and it worked. A deep sense of awe came over all of them, and the apostles performed many miracles and signs and wonders. And all the believers met together in one place and shared everything they had. They sold their property and possessions and shared the money with those in need. They worshiped together at the temple each day. They met in homes for the Lord's Supper and shared meals with great joy and generosity, all the while praising God and enjoying the goodwill of all the people. And each day the Lord added to their fellowship those who were being saved. Jesus is gone. His prayer and his example worked. The disciples, the apostles came together. They started gathering more people, and they started to build intense, deep community. And it was played out. Someone asked, I think it was Wendy asked me a few weeks ago, why do you always have this Acts 2 and our readings? Those of you who take the readings, that's always the last one. Every Saturday you're supposed to read this passage. because this is our theme at this church. I haven't done it forever, but this idea, what is Restore? We're a church that shares. I love the idea that they sold all their stuff and they took care of the needy, and they also shared meals together. We are a group that is in awe of Jesus. We're in awe of God. We worship. We are in awe because of closeness to Jesus, and we grow personally and grow in community. That's our marketing plan, to love each other and to share. So we want to remember the relationships and the times and the important people that we have that are close to us. The ongoing impact of those relationships and the ongoing impact of learning together, the ongoing impact of times when we have influenced or things we have gone together, we want to continue. That starts with remembering. We need to remember back those good times. We need to accurately have a view of what God has done and the friendships that we've had, the important moments and important people that we shared them with. And I think because we don't remember, sometimes we don't put a face to it. Sometimes it's easier to remember it. We have more impact when we remember who we went through something with. I think that's one of the reasons why we have so much dissent and hate and aspersions today that we write, especially online, because we don't have to sit there and face the person. We can say horrible things and cast it out into the ether. But sitting across having coffee with somebody, it's awful hard to say horrible things. In fact, it's so much easier to love somebody when we're sitting across from them, when we're in their living room together, when we're working on a project together. So we don't need to focus on the negative and the things that separate us. We need to focus on the things that brought us together in the first place, following Christ and serving him. Remembering that we have a common mission. Not only remember the mission, but then begin to live it out. Remember who we served with and continue to serve with them and invite others along the way. Not only remember fondly the time that we went out and were on mission and we got to go share the good news, but we continue to do the mission. I will say that's another danger in a congregation like ours that's aging. We've been believers for a long time, most of us. It's easy for me to remember my testimony. I've been clean, 15, 16 years now. And I want to have more than just one testimony. I want to be able to say, God has changed my life this week. I will admit, I'm going to do this, I repent if this is not humble. But with my father-in-law being in the hospital, I started setting my alarm, I turned it off now, but every half hour to stop and pray. I haven't done that in a while. And God has answered every one of those. So I told my family, and they give me specific things. Deb will say, hey, pray for this. And literally, God has answered every one of those prayers, miraculously. I know it's not me. I know it's not because I'm praying. God is choosing to do it, but I get to be a part of it. And it has strengthened my faith. I want to have testimony every day. I want to have some way that God has changed me. Yes, 15 years ago was amazing. God healed me. But I want to have testimony today, continuing to do the mission. Those changes, those moments of growth are the things that we share together and we can communicate to those around us. And I need encouragement. This morning, deeply encouraging. A little embarrassing this morning, but to have, I have 3 elders here, Dave and Brent and Chuck, be kind and help and be willing to jump in. I need that encouragement. You need that encouragement when you're not feeling well, when you're feeling down, when you're sad, to call each other or to call me or to reach out and call maybe some friend from 30 years ago that you know is always going to say something and always going to be there for you and be able to build you up. We need to admit we need encouragement at that moment. Sometimes not the easiest. We need to be willing to reach out and ask for encouragement. And we also need to be willing to be reached out to provide encouragement. Sometimes when somebody reaches out and says, I'm having a really rough day, this thing is really bugging me, it's very easy to be negative with them or to be Pollyanna. Well, it's all going to be fine. But to sit there and let someone grieve, to sit there and let someone rant, and then still offer positive, helpful, loving encouragement is a powerful thing. It's because of that. And you know how we're able to do that is because we spend enough time with each other. We've had intense time together. We've grown in Christ together that we know how to encourage and to love specifically. And of course we have common leadership. Not a speaker or a counselor or a camp director, but Jesus Christ. We are all following the same leader. So just some practical things. Always make unity our priority rather than our own gain or our own safety or our own security. Let's be humble. Let's wash feet. Humbly give tangible care to others, whether that's our time, whether that's sharing a meal, whether that's a listening ear, whether that's showing up and helping. And then we need as a church to share and grow and worship together. We need to gather. Again, I'm speaking to the choir literally. You guys are the ones here. But let's remind those maybe as we run into them, as we call them, as we see them around the week. Let's encourage people to gather. This is our main time to gather, so let's encourage them to be here on a Sunday if we can. Again, not in a guilt way. You know I'm never about that. But it's just always better when we're together. And then we need to intentionally return to the lessons that we learned at camp. Return to the lessons we learned when we first started. Pray, read and study, gather, and care and give humbly and sacrificially to each other of our time and our stuff. We're going to remember what started all this. We're going to remember today as we do communion. And we can open these little things. We're almost done with these things. I know some of you are going to really miss these. We've only got about 500 left. But we need to remember each other, the relationships we have. When Paul's talking in 1 Corinthians about communion, about the Lord's Supper, he starts off by saying, this used to be, they did a thing called the agape feast. It was an actual regular meal. And remember his thing is like, hey, don't forget about each other. You're all in this together. And the problem they were having is be just like a potluck that we would have. People would kind of bring their own stuff, and the rich people would bring great stuff, and they would save it for themselves. And the poor people wouldn't have much, and they had to sit and watch, and there was definite segregation. And Paul said, no, you need to remember each other. Remember what brought you together, that we're all one before Christ, that we all need his grace. And he said, and I love that he's like, just remember the relationships we had. And so when you remember that friendship, we assume that the Corinthian church learned that lesson, and they quit doing that, and they shared together. We need to remember each other. And then, of course, we need to remember Christ. That's why we do this. Throughout history of the church, all over the world, people do this same, I don't want to call it a ritual, this same sacrament. The same sacred thing. We're taking something mundane and simple like eating and drinking, something we do every day. Most of the time, sometimes we don't even think about it. But taking something so normal and infusing it with the sacred. And saying, we are going to remember, when we do the basic things of life, remember that our lives are fulfilled and we have hope because of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. We're dependent on him. In that passage in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul says this, for I pass on what I received from the Lord himself. On the night he was betrayed, the Lord took some bread, and he gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces, and he said, this is my body which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Let's do this together. And then he said later, in the same way, he took the cup of wine after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed by my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. Let's do this together. As we do this, as we perform this sacrament together, we're remembering the sacrifice of Jesus. We're remembering that he created a new covenant, that he brought us together with him and brought us together with each other. And so we can experience deep and intense and focused relationship. But the beauty of it is not only remembering what he did, but it's remembering what he is doing and what he will do. That we serve a God who is alive. We serve a God who cares, and we serve a God who is powerful. So as we remember back to the sacrifice of Christ that made it possible, let's remember also that we have a hope because he is alive and coming back. So I'll leave us with this. 1 John 4:12. No one has ever seen God, but if we love each other, God lives in us. And this love is brought to full expression in us. And I think when I was here, I didn't have time to copy it on the screen, but I'll just read it. May we be people who grow together because of our growth in Christ as we face intensity, as we face learning, and as we face a common mission. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Thank you for being patient with me today and encouraging. And we will see you next week.